Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20. Joining me to talk shop, talk footy, talk NRL and the Parramatta Eels, my good mates Sixties and Clint. Off the back of a breakthrough win for our NRL boys. Big weekend for the Eels fellas, and as always, I'll check in with you first, Sixties. How did you follow up or pull up from that surprise upset victory against the New Zealand Warriors?
Mate, it's always good after an Eels win, you know that, and managed to then enjoy Sunday. Well, first of all, there was a great effort from the NRLW team who went perilously close to beating the Sharks.
Cracking game.
A little bit unlucky there, and we'll talk about that shortly. But I went to see the new Deadpool Wolverine movie and talk about just full-on laughs and in-your-face one-liners and puns and references. And if you blinked, if you tuned out for one moment, you missed something.
It was full-on. And as I said to you, and we were discussing this off air, I've seen people nitpicking the movie because it was this sort of plot inconsistency and the writing wasn't this good here or there. It's like this movie is a reminder that it's okay for movies to be fun. Just to be fun. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. No more, no
if
less.
If you're worried about a plot, don't go and see this film. But if you're worried about a plot, I don't think you would have been seeing it anyway. I'm sure everyone that was going there has been doing it just because they know it's going to be a fun movie. And it was exactly that. So if anyone's thinking about going to see it, it's not a movie for kids, obviously, because
I mean, if you want to indoctrinate your kids into some very colourful language, then sure.
Yeah, colourful language, colourful scenes, and and colourful innuendo, or just straight out.
Yeah, innuendo is probably a tad too subtle for what was that on show there.
It probably was without subtlety. So, very, very enjoyable way to finish the weekend. So, what about you, Clint? How are you? Have you seen the movie?
Of course, I saw the movie. I saw it opening weekend, and I couldn't agree more. And the whole point of the movie is to be a bit of fun, and what's been a number of lean years for Marvel after obviously their cracking Infinity Saga. So it was good to see them break the fourth wall, poke a bit of fun at themselves, and give Ryan Reynolds the permission to do so. Really, it's a bit of a brave call to I guess publicly take a little bit of an L the way that the Marvel franchise has the last few years, and use Deadpool and Wolverine as a vehicle to through comedy to have some fun with that. So I really enjoyed it. But no, gents, I feel very vindicated after our win. 60s, we sat in the stand after the Melbourne loss, and I said, I reckon we're a good strong chance against the Warriors. And I feel very vindicated because I saw a replication or a build-on effort from the previous game. So, felt pretty chuffed on Friday evening. It also happened to be my wedding anniversary on the Friday, so it was nice to be able to have that little victory as opposed to a loss spoiling what is a lovely occasion and a date in my life. So. My wife was all the happier for the Eels having got the victory because she got to deal with Happy Clint as opposed to Grumpy Clint.
Is that 3 or 4 years now for you, mate?
4 years. 4 years I pulled up. So
yeah. Gee,
time's flying.
It only seems like yesterday. It's it's actually stunning that 4 years has passed. As I was mentioning this, Yoko's eyes just showed extreme surprise that it's that long. So yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of COVID, wasn't it? With the
Yep, that's it. And funnily enough, as well, it was game day. It was coincidentally a game in which we played the Dogs, and I remember coming back down the aisle and coming to you at a point 60s, and you told me this. You told me, "Hey, by the way, mate," I'm like, "Yeah, the score's 16-0, isn't it?" And you're like, "How did you know that?" Because 4 other people whispered it to me before I got to you.
Yes, it was. You always got to keep tabs on the Eels scoreline. So, yeah. Well, fellas, we've got with it being a home week this week, John and I are back in the home of the Eels Parramatta Leagues Club before the game on Friday night. So we will have this week, drum roll, Michael Butner. So Michael Butner is the Eels legend guest for the Cumberland Throw in Parramatta Leagues Club in the Bistro. We'll be kicking off at 5:30. So we've had a tremendous roll up there this year. It was a change of venue from us moving from Jack's Bar and Grill down to the Bistro. But certainly despite the Eels' run of losses that have happened over this period of time, the people have been flocking into the Bistro, taking advantage of that opportunity to meet the Eels legend players, grab something signed, grab a photograph, have a bit of a chat with them. And people, if you haven't had a chance to listen to Michael Butner, he's probably one of the most, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's not eloquent because, he is an eloquent speaker, but he's certainly someone who you can learn a lot about rugby league listening to
well
Michael.
versed in the craft of the game, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So it's not just when we get to have chats with these legends, it's not just talking to them about their careers, but it's also about breaking down the game a little bit. And and again, if you've got any questions that you'd like us to be able to ask Michael, be sure to send that through to us through the socials. I know there's a lot of people have my phone number and they text me questions or what have you. But or even if you want to put in the question in this post when it on TCT, the post that goes with the podcast, drop in the question there. We'll be happy to ask Michael that question. And John, apart from talking about being at the home of the Eels Para Leagues, also a shout out to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Their continued support has meant that we can keep bringing you our podcasts, our content on the Cumberland Throw. So thanks to Greg and the team out there. But apart from that, mate, I think we're ready to roll.
News team, assemble!
Well, fellas, there's been a little bit of news that's come out on 360 tonight, which is stating that Nathan Brown, the coach that is going to take on a role of assistant coach at the Parramatta Eels from next season. And John, as you know, I had a little bit of mail about that last week, which was interesting. I couldn't get any confirmation from the Eels whether that was the case. So, I took it as, well, I don't know whether this is factual or not, but it's looking like the bloke that let me know was spot on. So what's your take on Nathan Brown being added to the coaching staff next year?
Yeah, he was a popular figure in his previous tenure at the club when he was here in a what was the official title? Essentially, he was the high performance manager of the junior pathways in so many words, whether it was that way or not. And, speaking to people around the club, both player and, fellow staff member, it was really positive about what he was bringing to the club in that capacity. So certainly getting him back to the club in any capacity as a, off-field mentor, whether it's coach, whether it's pathways, would have been a positive. So can't be too unhappy about him coming back as an assistant coach. Obviously, there's a strong connection there to Jason Ryles, going back, way back to their playing days, and that was true for Trent Barrett as well. But club going in a different direction there, so I think it's good for Ryles to have some familiarity on his coaching staff. I think Brown will be a very strong sounding board for him, a chance to, be able to hammer out some ideas of a person that he knows well that can probably push back in a healthy manner, when he disagrees, and also, build nicely on stuff that he agrees with. So, yeah, really, really keen to see Brown coming on board. We've had, in our capacity as TCT, some wonderful chats with Brown, very passionate rugby league, very knowledgeable. Between his time in the NRL and over in the Super League, he's got plenty of coaching caps to his game, to his name, and has a great understanding of the game. And yeah, I think on 360 they're talking about how it'll be good for Ryles to have someone he trusts that he knows won't be gunning for the head coaching role. And not that I think that was really an issue for anyone coming on board in Ryles' initial, contractual period. We could go get an absolute A staff of up and coming coaches, and I don't think any of them would be able to really make any moves for the head coaching role. We've signed Ryles for 4 years, and he's going to see out that contract. I would hazard a very strong bet. So, yeah, Brown's a great first step. And I think there's been a couple other names mentioned in the recent days and weeks. I think Sam Moa and was it Sam Weisenthal? And I think Weisenthal comes from a rugby union background, and Sam Moa coming on board with a forwards or defensive background. So the coaching staff starting to be assembled now. It's going to be really interesting to see how they go in the preseason.
Yes, Nathan Brown, he was the Elite Pathways coaching director, I think it was, as the in a similar role, I think, to what Joey Grimer had prior to his departure. So Nathan Brown came in there. We got to know Nathan a bit through his appearances on the podcast, talking about what was happening with the junior reps season, and we certainly found him very approachable in terms of what he was able to pass on to us about what was happening. We had a number of chats with him before and after the podcast, but more importantly was the feedback that we had from the junior players and staff about how much he was respected and valued for what he was able to do for the players in the system. So I only heard great positives about him. Clint, was that your feedback as well from his time at the Eels in Pathways?
Yeah, absolutely. Very well respected, very well liked. The benefit to our NRL side now is that we're also getting a very experienced operator who already knows our club and has experience with some of those pathway players that are about to make grade. So there's a familiar face for them there as well. I think this is a very shrewd appointment, both for Ryles and for the club. I actually see this as one of those rare scenarios where it's a real win-win for everyone involved. He's, as I said before, he's a very well-liked guy. I know Dad personally got on famously with him, and I won't share it on the show here, but Brownie has a very affectionate nickname for Dad. I actually had a brief chat to him just before we jumped on the show, and Dad was Dad was hearing it for the first time from me, and he was very, very happy to hear that. So I'm sure those two will have an exchange in due course about Nathan's return.
Yeah, and look, I guess one of the things that I'm hoping will be the outcome is because he had that connection with a number of players who are in the pathways who are just starting to emerge either into the jersey flag or maybe at the latter stages of SG ball next year, or maybe even going from jersey flag up to New South Wales Cup, is that there is that familiarity with him. There's that respect for him. And I'm hoping to some extent that it might help to retain some of the playing staff, the younger playing staff that have disappeared in recent times. And if we can stem that flow of talent out of the club, that's going to be important. And he may well end up being a catalyst towards that. So, I think it's a really good move. It's certainly one that I definitely am applauding in terms of the staffing of the coaching group for next year. Now, moving on, fellas, we're going to talk a little bit later in the NRL section about the Hall of Fame more broadly, but there are two people with connections to the Eels who have been named in the NRL's Rugby League Hall of Fame, and that being John Quayle and Jack Gibson. Obviously, John Quayle has that background as an administrator of rugby league and an administrator during what was a turbulent time in rugby league history when the Super League war was raging in the 90s. But he'd done such a fantastic job alongside Ken Arthurson in bringing the game into a new era during the 1990s, and obviously the code was absolutely exploding during that time, and that of course made it the attractive proposition for pay television. And when it comes to Jack Gibson, I mean, that the man's record speaks for itself, just the innovations that he brought into rugby league. And as John and I have found out numerous times in our chats with Eels legend players from the 1980s, Jack Gibson, the man, was even more amazing than Jack Gibson, the coach. And he had a phenomenal record with the Eels, 3 years for 3 premierships, and just, I guess, being a life-changing person to come into the lives of the Parramatta players in that time. John, your thoughts on those individuals being named in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I think they're all pretty strong appointments. I can't imagine there's going to be too much, if any, resistance to any of the named non-player inductees into the Hall of Fame. And you'd argue that some of them, like Gibson and someone else that we'll talk about later, even if it is controversial in its own little manner, they're in a circle Hall of Fame. We're talking the elite of the elite inside the Hall, and I suppose in terms of rugby league, they have a word for that, and it's immortal. And we haven't yet had a non-playing appointment to the Immortals, but a couple of these blokes, I think, will probably challenge that concept in terms of their importance. Because my qualifier for an Immortal would be that you can't tell the story of rugby league without these individuals. And Jack Gibson, Wayne Bennett, those sort of guys, I don't think you could tell rugby league or the story that is rugby league without them. So, yeah, really good appointments. I'll talk about my issues with the appointment of Wayne Bennett in the NRL portion of this podcast, because certainly he's worthy, just I have a little asterisk I want to put to it. But, yeah, common sense appointments. Sometimes these things, there's some head scratchers, but this year I think it's a pretty fair class.
Clint, I love the way that 40 qualified how he views immortality with rugby league. Basically, to be named as an immortal, it means that they can't tell the story of rugby league without mentioning the individual. I think that's most definitely the case of Jack Gibson.
Well, I don't expect anything less from our master of the words, 40, because we've known for quite some time just how talented he is, both behind the keyboard and behind the microphone. But
the wordsmith of TCT.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. And when you I guess take it a little bit further in terms of the story of rugby league, these I guess people being central characters in that story, and you unpack what they've done. The foundations of the game as we know it today do not exist. The game we know today don't exist without the foundations which these people established. Particularly, obviously we're focusing on the Parramatta related inductees here in Quayle and Gibson, but even someone like Ken Arthurson, he oversaw rugby league at a point in time which professionalism of sport in this country and rugby league in this country was ever evolving. Year on year, it was becoming more and more and more to eventually land us what became the NRL in 1998. So Jack Gibson, we don't have to go over his credentials. They're very well known in Parramatta circles. And, it was always a fait accompli when he would become a member of the Hall of Fame as opposed to if. And it's nice to see that officialdom take place.
Yeah, absolutely. Fellas, now that brings us to what is certainly in the lower grades for the Eels, a very interesting team list Tuesday. So, 40, can you take us through the first, starting off with the NRL? And I think it's a pretty straightforward NRL team list Tuesday.
Yeah, one change this week, and we're sort of scratching our heads as to the reason behind it because there is no official injury report as of recording on Tuesday evening. Let's do a final check. Yeah, no injury report. There we go. So not getting that one wrong. Trent Barrett naming 16 of the 17 players that sprung that upset on the New Zealand Warriors in round 23 now to take on the Penrith Panthers, which means you've got Captain Clinton Gufferson at fullback, Jake Tungor, Sean Russell, Will Penasini, Blaze Talangi, unchanged backline there. Same with the halves, Dylan Brown in the 6, Dejan Arce in the 7, Reagan Campbell-Gillard and Wiramu Greg starting front rowers, Brendan Hands at dummy half, Sean Lane, Bryce Cartwright, Ryan Madison rounding out what is an unchanged starting 13. On the bench, there is one change, though. So you got Lussick, got Ofengahi, got Dan Keir. No Luca Moretti. Matt Drury comes into the team in his place. Luca, seemingly a scratch per injury because I don't think he was on the suspension report coming out on the MRC. And then extended roster, another interesting inclusion here is you got Ethan Sanders, you got Isaac Lumi, Morgan Harper, Makasi Makatoa, and Kelma Tuolangi, who was due back roughly in this window, round 23, round 24, from that broken thumb he sustained against the Sydney Roosters way back in, was it round 17 or thereabouts? But yeah, he's back, but not named in Cup, only named in the extended roster here. So there is a question mark about his fitness, about his availability, and even if he was fully healed, I suppose there's also a question mark about his match fitness given he's been out for the better part of 2 months. But if he was available, you think he's got to be picked. He was in a real nice run of form prior to busting his hand and also getting that 4 or 5 week suspension that would have been there if he hadn't gotten hurt. But he was rounding into some really good, physically dominant form. So he's on the extended bench. And yeah, the Eels otherwise, 16 of the 17 players that surprised the New Zealand Warriors. And just one mystery exclusion there in Luca Moretti, who you have to wait until maybe tomorrow or maybe never, the way things are at the moment for the Eels, to get an injury report.
Yeah, the assumption would be that perhaps there's a fitness test or final medical with Kelma about his availability with in them naming him on an extended list but not naming him in New South Wales Cup. Let's just jump straight, John, into the NRLW team list as we power through this.
Yeah, narrow loss to the Cronulla Sharks, 2 points there for some goal kicking the difference, and I suppose a couple of lessons there in terms of the importance of getting to your kicks for our goals. They've always played a really good game against a really good opponent and can hold their heads up high. Certainly no need to be ashamed by going down to 2 or by 2 to the Sharks. So they now turn it around, going back to Brisbane, second trip in 3 weeks as they take on the Cowboys in round 3 of the NRLW, and no changes to that team that lost to Cronulla. No surprises there. Coach Steve Georgalis backing his young ladies to turn it around, which means you got Church at fullback, Faye and Donovan on the flanks, Owen and Kelly, the 2 union converts in the centres, and what a start to the career for Rory Owen as well, fellas. I know that Rosie Kelly is probably the more high-profile recruit coming from a rugby sevens background internationally, but Rory Owen's been a wonderful find from club rugby. In the halves, Cassie Towie Hiku and Rachel Pearson, who looks to have passed a concussion test that she had to take late in that game against Cronulla. Front row, Albert Jones, Todd Hunter, 8, 10, and 9. Then you got Chloe Jackson, who was very good in debut in the back row, alongside Mahalia Murphy, and then Kennedy Cherrington at lock forward. Rosie Beckett, Tyler Amiatu, Jade Fanua, Ruby Jean Kennard Ellis on the interchange. Extend the roster. A little bit of moves here. Tafoa Asul, we've seen her in the extended roster. She's having a good start to her Harvey Norman Women's Premiership campaign. A real beast in the red zone there for the Eels. But Brianna Eels now features on the extended roster, and Brianna's been playing for Wenty, not the Eels in the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership. So the Eels making extended use of 2 rosters there in the reserve grade competition. Chelsea Makira, Kate Fallon, and Bahuka Berryman Duffs round out their extended roster. And yeah, they're taking on a Cowboys team who was also 1-1 coming into this contest, I believe, and you'll recognise some of those names there. You got Whitfield, Rafstrand Smith, Dib. Who else is there? Manselman, another Raf Trent Smith, Bree Chester. So not a bad outfit there for the Cowboys. And it's going to be a good test for our girls as they hit the road or the airwaves on a plane, I suppose. Again, it's been a lot of travelling for our ladies.
How good is it to have someone named Eels playing for the Eels?
I know, even if it's spelt John Eels type, rugby union great, rather than obviously the animal/football team. It is such a natural fit, isn't it? So hopefully Brianna, who's having a good tilt at lock forward for Wenty, gets a look in at some point this year.
Yeah, let's jump straight back now to the New South Wales Cup, because there are a number of interesting selections that we'll maybe have a bit of a chat about.
Yeah, I think the Eels have made a pretty clear signalling of intent this week. Prior to, if you went back about a month, I would have said that the Cup was the better chance of making the finals over the flag. Things have now changed and tilted slightly, and I think the club's drawn a line in the sand saying, no, we're going to focus on making the finals in the flag. And as a result, we've seen a number of withdrawals or quote-unquote demotions for key players in Cup this week, which means there's no Jock Brazel, no Saxon Pryke, no Joshua Lynn. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone else, but the Cup looks like this. At fullback, it's Zach Sini, Lorenzo Molitalo, and Isaac Lumi on the wings. In some positive news, Ethan Martin's back from a hamstring injury. He starts in the centres this week. Really keen to see how he goes coming back from injury. Morgan Harper, the other centre. Manny Luke is thrown into the fire as a 5'8" this week. A specialist dummy half by trade. Manny is now being called to fill the breach and partner Ethan Sanders. Front row sees Ogden and Makatoa bookending Matty Arthur. Will Lewis. So you talk about that flag team getting reinforced. It means there's opportunities for other guys to come back up, and Will Lewis is prime among them. He starts on an edge. Young man making his senior debut there, so good chance for him to impress. Tony Matteo gets to come from the interchange to the starting pack on the edge. Brock Parker lock in the scrum. And then Antioch Vaitalamara, another flag player who's been real good in centres, being squeezed out this week. So he comes up to play on the interchange. It'll be interesting to see how they use him against the Panthers. Then you got vacant 15 on paraeels.com. And I'll come back to that quickly. But firstly, Kyle Castle and Reece Alderton rounding out the interchange. Yeah, so a vacant 15, and naturally had to do at least scratch the surface of an investigative effort there. So I went to newsouthwalesrugbyleague.com, fellas, and they do have a different team sheet, one that is filled out from 1 to 17. And the player in 15 is probably the most interesting selection we've had in Cup for a while, and that's saying something given that they've promoted a few flag players. But it's a first-year SG Ball eligible prospect who's carved out a really good spot in the flag team since getting the promotion this year. Young Josiah Funa Ayuta, specialist right edge back rower, who turns 18 this year. And I believe, I think he has inked a long-term deal with the Eels, at least that's what I saw on social media going back a while. Gets the call-up, and I can't think of a first-year ball-eligible player getting that sort of promotion since maybe Dylan Brown. So, yeah, it's a fair call-up there for Josiah, and he's being fantastic in the pathways for both the Harold Matthews and the SG Ball. And like I said, has really found his feet in flag this year as well. So he loses out his spot in the flag team, but gets the big tap on the shoulder and a chance to impress against one of the perennial powerhouses in New South Wales Cup in the Penrith Panthers.
Yeah, really interesting selections there. As you mentioned, players that are moving back to jersey flag, and I would assume that's to ensure their eligibility to play finals should they qualify for that. You've got some players who've been moved up now, whether they stay there every week or whether they rotate opportunities around for some of these younger players to play in open age football in these last few weeks remains to be seen. But certainly Josiah Funa Ayuta is someone who has been earmarked by the Eels to have a very big future at the club. He's earned Australian schoolboys selection in the past. He's an absolute powerhouse of a young forward. So even looking at his presence on the field in jersey flag, where, as you mentioned, he's in a position where he's still SG Ball eligible next year, but he already looks like he's a lot bigger than some of the opposing jersey flag players in that grade. So, what's going to be interesting for mine is whether Josiah stays as an edge player or ends up in the middle, because I would think he's only going to get bigger, but he's such a dynamic runner of the football and such a threat on an edge that I guess it's a matter of where they think they're going to be able to get the best use from him. But definitely one to watch there. Clint, what's the interesting takes that you've got out of those selection?
Well, I think you guys have probably exhausted all of those options there, and obviously we're stacking the flag side with the players that we hope to be eligible for a finals run. I think as well, it'd be good to see some of these guys who are either in the bottom part of our top 30 or on the peripheral of our top 30, and like Ethan Marden and Tony Masai, who've missed large chunks of footy this year, get some games and see how they can finish the year, because the strength of the first grade squad will largely be dependent on these guys who are in and around those areas for season 2025. So I'm keen to watch the Cup to see the performances of those types of players and how that's going to help enhance our NRL prospects for future seasons.
John, let's launch now into the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership team. They had a loss last night actually. They played
Monday night.
A couple of late tries to the Sharks sunk what looked like a chance of the Eels taking home the win there. What have they got? Any changes that you can see there?
A couple of changes, but not too much happening. So we start, as always, at fullback, Yasmin Baker. On the flanks, it's Debbie Dwahi and Shay Shipton. Kate Fallon and Aaliyah Hamano in the centres. And then you got the halves of Talara Bambut and Sarah Dimmick. So pretty much what we've seen pretty consistently this year for the ladies. Front row, Alita Namose and Raishi Falmasili are the bookends. Chelsea Makira, dummy half. In the back row, Bella Sanford's back, and then Talisha Maeva captains the team on the other edge. Rivali Arlo, the young lock forward. On the interchange, Raf Perigo, Lasalio Sita-Payne, Ashley Pottinger, and Fontaine Tafua, which again is what we've come to be used to seeing on that rotation. So it's a young and talented bench. Extended roster, Liana Dimmick, Tahila Valawanga, Caitlin Stanley, Alicia Bell, and Rory Muir. So good to see Bell and Muir back in the fold there. I'm not sure if they were injured, but at least they're now being named in the extended roster, might get some playing time in other grades. They're taking on the Bulldogs this week, so going to be a tough ask if the exposed form that we see in the Bulldogs in pathways, women's pathways, carries through to this grade, and they are, they're slightly ahead of the Eels, another mid-table team, so it's a pretty fair matchup this week.
Yeah, I think the Eels have been in the mix to get every one of the games that they've had so far. So just need to, I think, get some of those key moments won rather than lost. So, it's easy enough to say, but completions have been an issue. Let's hope they can get that under control this week and take advantage of being right in that game to ice the win. John, let's just launch straight into now the Jersey Flegg. Yeah,
some tough cuts this week. We talked about those boys that get a chance in Cup. There's also some boys who are going to be turning out for Sydney Shield or maybe Ron Massey this week that, very unfortunate to be making way given the holistic team form of the Eels in the back half of the season. But tough calls mean that there's good players in the mix. So look at this team, and at fullback it's Arthur Twiddle. On the flanks, Moe Elamadine and Oli McCarthy, two good wingers there. Devonta Vivella and Araz Namba are the centre three quarters. Matty Hunter will partner Josh Lynn in the halves. Front row, Sam Tuivasa and Tinkin Brown. Riley Smith, the dummy half. Jock Brazel back from Cup, we already mentioned that. With Dom Stratus on the other edge. Saxon Pryke also back from Cup at lock forward. So big boost to the back row stocks there. Max Tupou, Tyrese Lakini, Damascus Nemia and Raf Stratus, the rotational forwards. And again, very strong on the bench there for the Eels. That's a good team, Sixties. But some really, really tough calls there made by the coaching staff. And I can't disagree with any of them, but some players missing out this week that could consider themselves very unlucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have a bit of a chat about the round last week and the Eels victory, and that might give a bit of an idea about, how tough it was for some of the selection calls. Clint, anything you want to add about the Jersey Flag team list?
Geez, it's a strong team. Probably as strong as that we've named all year. These guys that have now had the benefit of some New South Wales Cup experiences, you hope come back down to this grade with, I guess, the benefit of that experience and really roll on and help this side's finals credentials, just like they did last season.
Yeah, it's interesting that they've got themselves into this position where you wonder now that it's, I guess they can almost reach out and touch a finals appearance. So I wonder whether the pressure they'll start to feel a pressure
Self-inflicted, yeah.
Really in the season thus far, as they were getting on a roll, it's almost like there was nothing to lose, and it seemed obvious that they've been enjoying their football, and I think that's played a big part in their success. So, very, 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 very interesting that they are naming the team as it is this week. And I think maybe the best thing to do would be to launch into a bit of a wrap of the weekend for some of the things that we want to talk about, because particularly with the Jersey Flag team, it may well relate to the unlucky players who misses out this week. So first grade, a win, an unbelievable win that none of us predicted last week.
No.
Yeah, John, do you want to add your final thoughts to that victory?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty confident to stand on what we said in the Instant Reaction podcast, but wonderful effort. Same as what we saw against the Melbourne Storm, but the application was obviously 100 times better. We came with a much clearer game plan, much better execution. Wasn't to say that we were flawless. There were some, late defensive lapses that sort of opened the way for the Warriors, not to ever really be a threat, but to make it a little bit spicier in the last 5 minutes than it needed to be. But yeah, this is the standard that we've been as fans, we've been begging this team to get back to, for weeks and months on end. And we speak about it, but it is amazing how much influence confidence can have, positively or negatively. And clearly the Eels for weeks and months have been on the negative end of that spectrum. Maybe, just maybe, there's a reason to think that a little bit of positivity could be creeping back into the way they're playing football, based on what we saw against Melbourne and especially against the Warriors. So, yeah, courageous efforts across the park. I thought the spine players are fantastic. I thought a number of other core players stood up and had good games. And, yeah, they were outrageously long odds underdogs in my books, and they certainly had egg on my face, which is a good feeling to have when you're tipping against the Eels.
Well, John, as you know, I give a huge shout out to Trent Barrett for that victory last week. I won't go too much into it, but I think he played a very big role. I know he would have played a very big role in getting their heads straight for that game. I thought it was. Well, I think I even said to a couple of people, he might have been my unofficial player of the match, just based on the prep that I watched. So, big shout out to Trent. I know that the club has been very happy with how he's been able to rally the players in what's been a tough season. We've seen that consistency now in the last couple of weeks with consistency of effort, and it's just a matter of getting that execution right. We'll obviously talk about the big ask that is there this week, but it was hard to ask too much more last week. Clint, anything you'd like to add?
The effort defensively, certainly for at the very least 70 minutes, and we'll look over the late sin bin and the effects of that. Was some of the best we've seen all year. 40 touched on the performances of the spine being absolutely top notch, which they were. I loved the simplified role that Dejan Arce played. Might have been his best game in an Eels jersey, to be honest. Being that ball distributor and kicking for spaces as opposed to trying to be the playmaker. That's the type of footy I like to see someone like him play. Everyone was willing defensively. Brendan Hands had a hell of a game. Who, of course, can forget Captain Courageous Clint Gutherson, who was everywhere as he always is. But found that little bit extra. Scored a great try, finish off a great team try, and that try save on Dallin Watene-Zelezniak at the end there. If it'd be considered pretty amazing if it wasn't Gutho, but because he comes up with so many plays like this, or has done so over the course of his career, you kind of take for granted what he does in those moments. But geez, just really, really impressive, guys. And sometimes I've said it plenty of times in the past. Sometimes you just need a victory to break you out of funk, and we've got a number of hard games to finish the year with. But you certainly want to be going into a game against the Penrith Panthers in winning form as opposed to losing form, and even more so, you want to be going to the game against the Penrith Panthers with your defensive structures set and a defensive mindset. And it seems like we've slowly turned the corner in that regard. That doesn't mean that it's going to be we should expect to keep someone like the Panthers to limited points, but it does mean that we're at the very least in my mind better prepared for the challenge than what we were 4, 6, 8 weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me also clarify your comments on Dejan Arce. Never mind might have been his best performance in an Eels jersey, was definitely his best performance in an Eels jersey. So, it was one of those games where he played so well that it actually allowed Dylan Brown to be dominant in another way in the game, which was basically back to his running game. So let's give Dejan a really big thumbs up for that performance, and we need every bit of that again this week. I don't want to dive into it too much, but they did defeat the Panthers last year without Mitch Moses and with Dejan Arce playing in the halves, and he played a pretty good game in that game last year. He needs to have a backup performance again this week. NRLW, John, we've already given it a quick comment there, but definitely I think a game where the girls will end up looking in the mirror at the reasons why they didn't win. I thought a couple of tough strip calls on them.
Yeah.
It certainly at least one of the strips with Elsie Albert, and then it very much looked like a strip that was on Cassie Toihiku, where the ball was ripped out of her arms as she was going into the line, and then it was propelled back towards her own line, which basically, as far as I was concerned, constituted a knock-on. But, all that aside, not being able to get to the kick in that latter stages of the game when they were looking at maintaining that lead really kept inviting the Sharks back into the contest.
Yep. Yeah, it's a thing that we always bang on. It's a rugby league fundamental. It's a classic coachism, isn't it? Talking about the importance of completing your sets and getting to your kick. And we saw that, sort of exhibit A against the Sharks, who are far too good a team to be spotting that sort of field position and opportunity to attack. And I'm still in the midst of penning my gin and logic. But, the crux of it was that the Sharks were lucky in two different ways in that game. One was the kick deflection that went straight to Biddle the game-winning try. And that is the bounce of the ball luck. But the other luck that they were gifted to was by the Parramatta Eels in those incomplete sets. And there's luck that you can't control, which is that Biddle try, and obviously that's a backbreaker. But there was luck that the Eels could control, and that was, whether it was strips in there or not, which I agree with you, there were some pretty dubious, hands on the ball moments there. But there are also some, cold drops in that sequence of incomplete sets too. It's a big teaching point for our girls. the importance of sticking to the plan and getting to your kick. And, beyond that, it was a really good game. I thought that both teams actually had cracking goal line defense. I thought both sides were getting frustrated attacking the goal line. The Eels earlier in the game when they had a swarm of possession on the Cronulla goal line, and even went to some more exotic attacking plays between the two halves, and Rachel Pearson kicking for Cassie Toihiku, and that narrowly missed twice in the game. And then, vice versa, the Sharks had long strings of possession in the second half on Parramatta's goal line, and it took that deflection, a ricochet in the front line of defense to break that. Wasn't even the stalemate. The Eels were in the lead there. So, yeah, really good game. Some tough teaching points. I don't think Steve Giles is going to be, monumentally upset or anything like that. He'll obviously be frustrated they missed the 2 competition points, but they played tough. We got to see the continued breakout of a young star in the making in Rory Owen. And I'm hoping that we can now feature her counterpart on the other side a little bit more as the season wears on. But plenty of reasons to be positive if they can take the lessons out of this game and apply them correctly.
Yeah, I must say, Rory Owen, for someone who's got a rugby union background, looks like a natural at rugby league.
Just hit the ground running, hasn't she?
She's very impressive, isn't she? Very, very impressive.
Intuitive attacker.
Both sides of the ball.
Yeah, intuitive attacker, has a really good feel for what lines to run and how to use a sideline effectively without getting too close. Big engine. We saw about 180 metres plus against the Sharks, and there was only one line break in there. So it wasn't like she was padding it with a couple of line breaks, which, is good for a different reason, but you can get misleading data from those numbers. And then on the flip side, like you said, Quint, defensively, she's made some great calls, great physicality. She's taken on some pretty storied centres in her first couple of games and has not been left, hanging by any means. So really smart recruitment.
It's not even holding your own. Like, I think that she's
it's definitely underselling, isn't it? She's been fantastic. And I mentioned Rosie Kelly and getting opportunities later. I don't think Rosie's being bad. I think Rosie's also shown some really nice touch as she's made the transition to rugby league. Just Rory is still in the spotlight right now. She's just been awesome. So Eels in a really good position roster-wise here. I think the big issue that might end up hurting us is that I really like Tanika Todd-Hunter as a utility dummy half coming off the bench. I'm not sure if she's ready to step into that full-time number 9 role compared to where Ruben Cherrington looked like she was at Ruben looked like she was ready to make that big jump this year. And maybe our forwards probably were hurt a little bit getting onto the advantage line in this game, and they had to fight a little bit harder to make their own meters as opposed to what was happening last week with Ruben's service. So that's going to be a big job for Tanika and Rosemary Beckett to try and fill in. And I suppose that could be the argument moving forwards is Sixties, you and I both have big raps on Rosie Beckett, but maybe the Eels might be better served with a specialist dummy half on the bench and maybe Chelsea Makira. We have to wait and see how that plays out. But that's probably the one thing I'm a little bit leery on now for the Eels, is just the dummy half depth after losing their starting number 9.
Yeah, well, Ruben brings that aggression as well. Like she is just, she contrasts to Tanika, who she's an opportunist.
Yes,
she loves taking those darts out of dummy half, testing the defence. That's maybe starting to look a little bit tired. That's why she's looked so effective at being injected in certain times of the game. But as I said, Ruben, she mixes that up. She doesn't mind taking the line on herself, but she's got that real aggressive streak about her, that physicality. That's I guess something that features in her sister's game, in Kennedy's game, and they're almost like the Parramatta NRLW version of the Bruce Brothers. So it's a shame that we don't get to see her for the rest of the season. But mate, they've got to make best use of what they can. I also wondered whether, because I liked what Rose Beckett did when she came on, and I just wondered whether we might have benefited from Rose getting a little bit of time earlier in the game.
Mm-hmm. Quite possibly, yeah.
Like either side of half time.
It's always the challenge of the rotational dummy halves, isn't it? Finding the right junction in the game to get him in there. And look, she'll be better for the run if they end up staying with Rosie as the utility dummy half. I'm sure she'll grow and grow as the season wears on. Before I hand over to Quint for his take, just want to shout out the debutante Chloe Jackson. Thought she had a great game. Got heavily involved. Some nice footwork at the line. She ended up Creighton. She was probably the catalyst for Creighton. I know there was an offload from, I think, was it Elsie or Kendi earlier in the play, but her footwork and ability to pivot and get to the outside support player created that try for Donovan, I think it was, down the right flank. So really good debut from the young back rower.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned before in my coverage of the New South Wales Women's Premiership last week that Chloe was such a workhorse in that game. And I think I even said I was disappointed in reading back over the blog that it really didn't capture the workload that she did, because obviously I'm not calling a play-by-play of and having all the players getting their mention during the game. But what impressed me, John and Clint, was how she was able to bring that workload that she displays in the Harvey Norman competition and bring it to a higher level in the NRLW. I mean, there she is making her debut, and she's coping with the faster pace, the bigger hits that happen in the NRLW, and excelling. So, Clint, I want to throw to you. We've just mentioned a couple of players that really caught the eye in Chloe Jackson and in Rory Owen. Is there anyone else that caught your eye, or are you on board with just with how well those two young women went?
Well, I mean, I'm not just on board with how well those two went, but we've been harping on for a little while now about the potential of Cassie Toihiku, and things just happen around her, don't they? She just looks likely every time she touches the ball, and I'm excited at the prospect of when she has a real not only breakout performance but announces herself to the competition, because it feels like she's just on the precipice at the moment, and there's definitely excitement every time she gets the ball in her hands. Likewise, I think there's a bit of unheralded work going on, and certainly evolved in our defence as a whole, but certainly in the middle with the likes of Maddie Jones. I think she's been very tight in the middle defensively, and obviously the presence of Elsie is very well known and very well quantified, and likewise with Kennedy. But I continue to be impressed with just the 180 in our attitude and our defense in the NRLW side, because you think back 12 months where it was very bleak viewing watching the girls play, and the first two games have been excitement and enjoyment as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. Well said, mate. Well said. Now, we might just fast forward over a couple of grades. I don't know about you fellas, but it's a bit hard to talk about the New South Wales Cup team, because it was another shellacking that they copped in that game. And we also, I don't know if either of you were able to catch it. I wasn't able to catch the match in the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership, so there's not really anything that I can add to that. So I thought, if it's okay with you, that we jump to the Jersey Flegg clash that happened on Saturday, where the Eels were drawn to play the Warriors over in New Zealand. The Warriors sitting in a lowly position on the table, and the Eels, really, I think they actually escaped with a win in this one, fellas, because not only did the Eels score a late try, but to get the win, but they also saved a last-second try by the Warriors. And believe me, it was tight. It was a tackle made by the fullback, and I can tell you, it only just got the Warriors winger's foot on the line, on the sideline, before he grounded the ball. He grounded the ball in the in goal. There was no doubt about that. But it was touch and go as to whether he was out. And it's, of course, there's no video replay in any way on the in that grade, and it was adjudged that by the touch judge that that Zach Hunter had been able to take his foot into touch. It would have been disaster. Like, it was literally full time, because as soon as that tackle was made, the ref signalled the end of the game. So, tight result in that one. Again, I'm going to give a lot of praise to Riley Smith. He to me has probably streaked away with any Player of the Year awards in this particular grade, and that's not meant as, you know, other players haven't stepped up and done a fine job, but he scored an individual try where he took a quick tap near halfway and just sliced right through the Warriors, who weren't ready for the quick tap, and then ran around the fullback. Great individual play there. He does a mountain of work in defence. He's the energizer rabbit with the how much he pops up all over the field in both attack and defence. And he had another fine game. You know, that was probably a game that, as I said, they were lucky to get away with, but you need those, you know, like they lost some of those games earlier in the season. They're now getting them, and they're now just 2 points adrift of the top six. Anything you want to add about the weekend, John?
No, I mean, great result in NRL, good result in flag, although they made us sweat a little bit. And I thought that the NRLW was really gutsy. So most of the grades flying high there. Obviously, bad loss for the Cup, and it wasn't a bad loss in Harvey Norman's, but they didn't get the biscuits there. But good weekend of football on the whole for the Eels.
Yeah, Clint?
Geez, you take the victories that we've had across a couple of grades this past weekend over many of the previous weekends we've had. So, we've probably hit about equilibrium in the scheme of things. But Woody feels a lot better when the NRL side's winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And fellas, the only thing I wanted to very quickly mention and very briefly mention is that on 360 last night, Phil Rothfield was talking about the Parramatta Eels constitution and where that leaves Sean McElduff, the chairman of the board, the football board for the Parramatta Eels. Rothfield was actually correct in stating that the constitution for the football club says or dictates that directors have a maximum term of 9 years. Now, the football board came into being through Max Donnelly during his time as an administrator with the Parramatta Leagues Club, and he set up a board that at that stage, I think it had the 5 independent directors plus himself, and I have a feeling back then it was even Jim Sarantinos who was on the board there through his role with Max Donnelly as the appointed administrators of the Parramatta Leagues Club. And so it was the start of 2017 when the board came into existence. So the time that they are expected to finish up is actually the end of 2015. Now, over the years, there have been various board members who have stepped down and had their position taken. So there's only a couple of board members that have been there for the entirety of that time. And yes, they have to step down by the end of next year. So, look, that's pretty much all I wanted to say at this stage, only that Rothfield was accurate in discussing the Constitution and also where that leaves Sean McElduff. Fellas, I think that just about wraps up our Eels news for this week. And, of course, we know what that means as we hit the halfway point in our news podcast. I trust you got something special for us again this week, John.
Yeah, been watching a bit of baseball lately, and while I'm a Seattle Mariners fan, one of their former prospects went to the New York Mets, and he's a very good reliever. It's a little bit streaky, and he's got a song that they play when he comes out, which is a bit catchy, and you might have heard it depending on what you listen to, but it features part Australian artists, so Basement Jaxx and Timmy the Trumpet, Narco, so a very trumpet-heavy theme this week, and this is Edwin Diaz's walkout music as he comes in the ninth inning to try and save the game for the Mets. So, yeah, American sports, lots of pageantry, flashing lights and strobe effects going off as the pitcher comes out to face what is usually the final three outs in a given game. And I think they actually flew out Timmy Trumpet to literally perform it live as Edwin Diaz walked out at one point. So they're very much embracing the energy that comes with that song.
Well, if there's any listeners here that, and I know there are absolutely thousands of podcast listeners that tune in every week, and this is one of their favorite parts of the podcast. And if you'd like to see 4020 as the DJ at Parramatta Eels home games with his own special brand of
DJ
sport music,
yeah.
DJ 4020, let's just get the hashtag happening. DJ 4020.
Be the most manic, like mood shifting playlist you'll ever hear at a football game. We go from classical music to game, like video game music, to trance and trap music. So there we go.
And one thing that we can guarantee is you're not going to get the recorded Eels chant. No. Okay, John, I'm going to throw straight back to you for the NRL results weekend wrap.
Yeah, so we got the NRL and NRLW results to go over very quickly. Let's start, as always, with the Telstra Premiership. Started on Thursday with a high-scoring game, which I think you have something to say about here. No, it wasn't this game. It was the Queensland game that you had something to say about, Sixties. West Tigers going down to the Cowboys, 48-30. I think the biggest thing out of this one was on two fronts with the officiating. One was a no call on a very clear obstruction, Nappy Coruscant, and then the quote-unquote controversy around Justin Olam getting sent off for direct forceful contact to the head of a player. I was very fine with Olam getting sent. I don't know about you boys. I suppose the argument about Asofa Solomona not getting any time for a sin bin or a send-off in the Saturday game probably warrants, a counter argument, but I think that's just the classic NRL being inconsistent rather than this call being wrong. So probably the biggest thing out of that game was those two calls. Eels down in the Warriors, we already spoke about that. High-scoring game between the Dolphins and the Roosters up at HBF Park, or up sideways west, HBF Park, Perth. Roosters holding on to win 40-34. A lot of points scored this round so far. That carried over the Saturday, where Sixties, you got done dirty in the big Titans second half effort to win 46-18. Then the scoring reined in just a little bit. Tight game between the Dragons and the Storm. St. George ending, was it a 23-year hoodoo? They've got some cracking hoodoos, St. George, but Flano and the crew surprising the Melbourne Storm, 18-16 win. I'm pretty sure I saw Ben Hunt mouth F the Storm at the end of that game, but that might be just my bad lip reading skills. Then we had the Sharks, 2 good for the Rabbitohs, 20-6. Penrith holding off the Knights to win 22-14. Nathan Cleary, the 69th minute hero there. Then the round closed out with the Bulldogs edging past the Raiders in a very entertaining game that was unfortunately saddled with some off-field bullshit from some Dogs fans that were being Dogs fans.
Yeah, we will talk about that right at the end of the podcast. But yeah, you did reference the woe of my punt, which is I can stop anything, which is why I don't back the Eels in games. I have had that problem of backing Eels players for Dally M awards and well, in the case of Gutho, destroying his season, and enough said for me backing Jared Hayne in 2018 to win a Dally M medal. Yeah, I won't say anything more about what my coin did there. And of course, I made sure that the Eels were able to romp home in the NRL on Friday night because I put some coin on the Warriors. As much as I'm ashamed to say that, it was actually my way of ensuring that the Eels won. But I did believe that there was going to be a massively high-scoring game between the Titans and the Broncos, and I put a bit of coin on it being total match points of 66.5 or more, and we ended up with what
46
was it?
plus 18 is 64.
64 with tries disallowed and goals missed, and
Eddie Campbell ruined your weekend. 60.
Look, it was only just a fun little punt, but I was watching it come to fruition, and I thought, I'm finally going to jag the result that I so deserve. And no, wasn't to be. But John, look, my main take out of that is something that I've added in as a last-minute inclusion into our run sheet. So after we talk about the NRLW, I want to talk about obstruction rule, if we can.
Yeah,
so
I'm ready to fire up for that one. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my main take. Is this is it's becoming a farce.
Yeah.
So, Clint, any big takes that you've got from the weekend that was the NRL?
I don't know if I necessarily have big takes, but it's more just a sense of momentary relief with the Tigers losing to the Cowboys and us getting up against the Warriors. The Tigers were looking likely in that game, and I get why there's a sense from maybe some parts of the Tigers supporter base where they feel a little bit hard done by in the send-off. But that being said, I completely agree with 40. And when I saw that happen in real time, I'm like, well, it has to be. You got 5'1" Justin Nolan against 7 foot Helam Lukey, and he's been able to make connection with the head and not closing his arms. It was only going to be one result, from in terms of a textbook definition of the offence committed. He had to go. So regardless, they still made a good account of themselves, a man down. Leichhardt and the Cowboys, something that don't mix that well. And even though they got the win, they looked very shaky in doing so, even with the one-man advantage. So I found that interesting viewing, but also relieving viewing from a personal stance for our boys.
Yeah, I think that we've all been worried that the Tigers might just jag a win somewhere because they do have some attacking prowess.
And there's still time for them because the rest of their games this year are all at home. And the only time that they're not at home is with their bye that's still in play. So, they've if they're going to pull one off, you'd imagine they're more likely to do it at home than to do it away. And it's I wouldn't say we're out of the woods yet.
And it's
no, far from it.
It's
I think we have to.
We have to find at least another
one. Yeah.
win before we go to Campbelltown on in the last round.
It's
At least.
one for David Middleton, but the Tigers have to be on track for the single season record for combined sin bins and send-offs. They've just been raining them every week. Multiple sin bins, occasional send-off. So I don't know if Middo's on top of that one, but would be very keen to see where they stand all time, or at least modern era in terms of stat-tracked games.
I can't be bothered going and tracking what their suspension record is, but I'll tell you what, they'd have to be going extremely well, and I say that with tongue in cheek,
to challenge the 2023
get past what we produced last year in terms of 21 weeks of players missing through suspension.
Yeah.
So
very impressive. Very impressive.
Yeah. So, John, let's go and jump into the NRLW weekend results.
Yeah, round 2 in the books, where we spoke about our Parramatta Eels narrowly going down to the Cronulla Sharks on Sunday. Prior to that, Saturday kicked off with the reigning premiers Newcastle Knights getting a real big scare from the Canberra Raiders. In fact, it took a double or a sort of back-to-back series of tries between Gallagher and Upton for the Knights to escape jail. Canberra firmly in control of that right up until the 64th minute. So they'll be ruling letting a big scalp go by there. That game was backed up into the Titans versus the West Tigers, and Gold Coast grand final team last year looking real sharp this year. Way too good for the Tigers, 28-12. On Sunday, the other two games outside the Parramatta clash saw the Roosters down the Broncos 28-12. Not too dissimilar from the margin that we put on them last week. And then a high-scoring game between the Cowboys, Parramatta's opponent next week, and the Dragons 38-34 up in Townsville, Queensland Country Bank Stadium. 7 tries to 6, but 5 goals apiece. So just that one try of difference at the end there. God, that is a lot of tries within the scorers list there. That might be the highest scoring game in NRLW history between two, maybe not single scoreboard, but between two teams. So very, very fun round of NRLW. It's been a great start to the competition. We've got what looks to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 or 9 of the teams looking viably competitive. Perhaps West Tigers and maybe the Broncos. Off the slow starts here. So good start to the competition. Really keen to see how it shakes out for our girls in the coming weeks.
Yeah, look, my take from that was probably, well, there was 2 things. First of all, the pace of Chapman.
Yeah, she runs like the wind, doesn't she?
Oh my goodness! For her team, the Titans, it's just a matter of we'll get the ball in her hands.
It's like the old under 9 strategy, isn't it?
Yeah. Because it's not just the pace; it's the power as well. So she can brush away with from a defender with that combination of the strength and the pace. And as soon as she's away from anyone, well, no one's going to catch her. So, she really impressed last weekend. But I think the biggest talking point is what you touched on there with the Broncos, because they didn't look like they were in the contest at all. I know that the scores got reasonably close, but or relatively close.
54th minute converted try really helping the Broncos in that regard. They definitely had a slow start. 60s. They do get Gal Broughton back this week. I think it was a neck injury that had her sidelines. So that is a big boost to the team. But we saw it with our girls last year. It's only a 9-week competition. Games you drop now, especially if you drop your first couple or first 3, it sets you so far back. So especially when the level of competition is fierce. There like I said, there are a lot of teams that look like they are finals contenders. We got, last year's grand finalists, Newcastle on the Gold Coast, Sharks, Roosters, Raiders, Eels, Cowboys, Dragons. Literally the only 2 teams right now that look like they are not in legitimate contention are the Broncos, who want to be getting better, and the West Tigers, who they're a young franchise still. They're going to find their way eventually. Or maybe not. It's the West Tigers. Who knows? Had to poke fun of them somehow. But yeah, it's tough sledding, mate. You drop these first couple of games and you got to start winning and winning lots.
Yeah, Clint, anything you'd like to add?
I think John took the words out of my mouth there. I'd be a little bit concerned if I was in either the Tigers or Broncos camp at the moment. they've got to find a way to win and win this week, really, because if either of those sides go 0-3, well, there's a third of the season down, and it'd only take one more loss after that point where they go, well, we're in. We have to win in all our remaining games territory. So, and that's to even be a chance. And you kind of hope that one or both of them do, because if you have two sides that have lopsided loss counts, it means that at the other end of the table, it's a high entry point into the finals. So you kind of hope for some of these upsets to happen in a 9-week competition like the NRLW. So here's hoping, for our own goals' sake, that some of those teams jag some results so that they remove that element from the play.
Okay, fellas, I hinted at it, and now it's time to let loose. Well, I'll let 40 off the chain here. John, obstruction rule. Are we back into fast territory?
Oh, God, we are. 100% we are, mate. You can't look at, and this isn't an accusatory you, this is just, the inquisitive you. You cannot look at recent results of what the bunker has produced and tell me that the bunker is operating with a cohesive philosophy as to what is and isn't an obstruction. Literally just round 22 in the books past, West Tigers, Parramatta Eels, both darted by clear obstructions. I mean, ours was bad. The one against the West Tigers was so blatant on Api Carousel, like that, not him being guilty of it, but him being the victim of it on Api Carousel, that I was stunned when it was, awarded as a try. And the one against Parramatta was bad enough. I don't know if there is now a directive or a missive that you can be interpretive again, because we were operating under a strict black and white protocol for a long time. It was binary. Either the obstruction happened and some slight, significant, massive, didn't make a difference on the spectrum, some advantage was gained, and it's a penalty. And it's been, for the last couple of years, it's been weeding back and just slowly going back to allowing players to take incremental advantages, and as long as they give themselves up after doing a little bit, it's okay, which has then paved the way for some of these other things that happen where players and teams are taking clear advantage, and either they're shifting the ball for good meters or literally scoring tries, and we're back in the situation of, it was a defensive decision, he touched him in, it didn't impact the play. Dylan Brown literally was impeded as he was checking off the front of a lead runner, and still got into not just into the frame, got hands on the man as he was crossing the line. Api Carousel was literally knocked over and still got back into the frame to try and make a play. What are we doing here? All this demonstrates is that you cannot trust the referees with interpretation. And as soon as you give them an inch, they take the mile. Go back to black and white, make teams play football properly in the context of obstruction. You get it wrong, you get penalised. Even if you don't take an advantage, you get it wrong, you get penalised. Just take it away from the referees in this interpretation, because it's all well and good when the shit teams on the ladder and the Eels and the Tigers are copping the bad calls and it's not influencing finals outcomes, but it's going to hurt the finals, and it's just so frustrating as a fan. Yeah, it impacted us this weekend, but I was upset already watching the game the night before because the Tigers played before us, and I was left baffled as to how that was let go. And some of the Tigers, justifiably, that was a terrible call. Please, just.
Yeah, it is a disgrace, John, because earlier this year we were seeing some calls where try would be scored, and then you'd hear that little toot of the whistle and the signal that we're going to the video, and you're thinking, well, they can't be thinking there's an obstruction there. And then you see someone way in field, a long way from the
miles
play,
from the play, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Impact. And I think there was some classic ones where it was even within the in goal that someone had got impeded, and the try was scored nowhere near the particular player. But yeah, long way from the play, and no chance whatsoever of being involved in the defence, or not even affecting the defence in the slightest. But because technically, as you say, with the black and white application of the rule, there's an obstruction. Now, fast forward, and we've almost done a 180 on this. As you said, those two calls this last weekend, it's bordering on the absurd that they're missed. Especially, you can understand what happens with the on-field referee missing something, but when you've got the bunker having the opportunity to review it and just giving it a pass mark, that one with Api Coruscant, just from recollection, did the referee look as if he was almost going to call it straight away and then put the whistle away and then let it run through for the try?
I think you might be right, yeah.
So, I mean, he's immediately thinking, well, there's an obstruction here. And, I mean, the fact that he puts the whistle away, that worries me for a start, when referees start putting the whistle away and they're waiting for an outcome, because what happens if the player's tackled anyway and they've got more tackles up their sleeve after that point? They've taken an advantage, and here's the referee waiting to see if it plays out to a try so they can go to the bunker and make a video ref call on it. I mean, that's just wrong anyway. And we see that so many times, regardless whether it's an obstruction or something else, that I mean, the number of times we see it where I know I am guilty of this with Eels games, where I think that the referees miss something, and I'm begging an Eels player to take the tackle rather than looking to score the try, because I'm thinking, well, it's going to be denied by the bunker. We're far better off to take the tackle and work for the try after that.
Yeah, it promotes such negative behaviour, doesn't it? You know, you don't want gamesmanship to creep into it. But going back to that, what you're talking about years yonder, and I know people are frustrated by a sloppy blocker being run in front of the post that impacted a try scored in the corner, but at least it was consistent. And, again, it punished teams for being sloppy. It punished teams for being lazy. You're going to run a blocker, run it right. Get onto the inside shoulder, run through the line, do not impede the defense. And as it stands right now, the amount of stuff that happens, and we're only talking in try-scoring situations, by the way, in general play, the amount of obstructions that are happening on people looping back in from the sideline, back midfield, or someone picks up a loose pass and starts running behind 5 of their forwards, rein it in, penalise them. People will tidy it up quick, smart once they start getting pinged for it. But it's just the cycle of NRL officiating. You have a crackdown on something, you have a consistent application of something for a while, and then it starts to fade away and go another way. And unfortunately, this is every team runs block plays. Every team, it is the most basic and efficient means of attacking a defense and creating uncertainty in the defensive line by posing simple but demanding questions, and teams go to them as almost a crutch. And it is a huge part of the metagame rugby league, and it's not been officiated properly. So I would love that to be tidied up. And going back to, if you get it wrong, you get penalised. No interpretation, no allowances. Because surrender tackles look stupid when you don't get penalised for a surrender tackle anymore, and it doesn't really benefit the defense in any way. And B, I'm okay with the offense getting penalised for bad play of the balls, for bad blocks, for all those sort of things. Play the game. If you're going to exploit these things, do it properly or get penalised.
Yeah, Clint, your namesake, Clint Gutherson, he asked a valid question of the referee, which was, do we need for Dylan Brown to hit the ground for it to be an obstruction? And I think you could argue that as Dylan was coming across, if he had gone to ground, if he had taken a dive, that it would have drawn the attention of the bunker a little bit more, and perhaps the call goes the Eels' way. Now, it obviously didn't impact the result, but it might have. So, anything you wanted to add about that? They're taking a dive.
Boys, as we were talking then, I actually got a call from 1934. It was Cole Porter, and he just wanted to notify me that anything goes, because that's what it feels like with obstruction rule at the moment.
Yep.
I was watching the Warriors' first try unfold, and in real time, I was like, "Oh, all good. They'll call this up. We should get away and keep them to nil." We certainly, as the game unfolded, we would have kept them to nil until about the 70th minute mark, had that try not been allowed. And I couldn't believe when I saw the little, I was waiting for the ref to blow his whistle, and then all of a sudden see the try confirmed. And I think I shouted the one profanity I shouted out all night when I saw that, because it was as textbook as you like. You know, you guys touched on a couple of examples where we've seen the real extremes of the interpretation of the rule applied in the earlier parts of this year. Well, this is about as straightforward as one as you can rule. So, you know, I think Clint Gutherson, he's you could interpret he's being a little bit cheeky, but I think he's being legitimately asked, well, does he have to hit the ground? Oh, you know what, if the rules are going to be anything goes from the referee side, then it might as well be from the players' side, because if they don't tidy that up and control it the way that John suggested, well, they're opening Pandora's box for these types of things to happen, because the players are always going to push the boundaries of the rules. It's part of being a highly competitive athlete in a highly competitive competition. You know, it's up to the referees to maintain control. When you have inconsistent rulings and inconsistent interpretations of the rules, the players are going to be naturally frustrated, and by virtue of that, they're naturally going to push the rule book further just to see what any given referee might interpret in any given week. It's beyond frustrating, and I think it's a very valid question that Guth asked. Who was our referee in the Warriors game?
It was
John's favourite ref.
Was it?
Wasn't it?
Todd? Let me just double
Todd
check
Smith.
this.
Todd Smith.
Let me just double check this. It was Todd Smith, yeah.
Yeah, and
Grant Atkins in the box as well, which speaks to the obstruction.
Which it's really frustrating that was missed. And, you know, this week I note that we've got Gutho's favourite, or should I say, this referee's favourite player in Clint Gutherson and Peter Goff. It'll be interesting to sort of see if there's any contentious clause that comes up, how that's managed, because we know the two aren't particularly fond of each other based on their on-field interactions this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, fellas, we're going to move on because there's still quite a bit for us to get through with NRL news. We spoke earlier about that Hall of Fame list, and just quickly going through it, we've got John Quayle, as we mentioned, and Jack Gibson. Beyond those people with a Parramatta connection, the great broadcaster Frank Hyde. He was certainly the voice of the generation that I belong to, listening to the radio coverage of rugby league, sitting there on the sidelines and the card table. He'd get cranky. He'd be asking for the ball boys or whoever's in front of him to get out of the way. He's trying to call the game. It's synonymous with if it's high enough, it's long enough, it's straight, it's there, straight between the posts. It was his calls were classics in some of the, I guess, the vernacular of rugby league, some of the things that he'd include in his calls. So, and of course he was a player in his own right. And his son, Greg Hyde, played for the Eels in the early 70s. David Morrow, likewise, another famed broadcaster, but of course being famed for his television broadcasts and not only on the ABC, but then the radio broadcasts on the ABC and on 2GB. We mentioned before Wayne Bennett, And also we mentioned before Ken Arthurson, who alongside John Quayle was instrumental in guiding rugby league through some really troubled times in the 1990s. John, you spoke briefly about that you were at odds with regard to the naming of Wayne Bennett, not in terms of him deserving to be named, but with a technicality around this.
Yeah, I mean, Wayne Bennett is a slam dunk, a Hall of Fame inductee as you're ever going to get in rugby league. And like I said, he will legitimately, or should, when the conversation's ready, legitimately challenge for a place among the immortals as a coach, not a player. His contribution to the game is that vast, of that high quality, that neither of those two credentials, a Hall of Famer or an immortal, should really be challenged. Where I do take umbrage with is the fact that he is an active member of the rugby league game, and it just feels, it's not to say you can't do it, but it doesn't feel right to have active players, active coaches now, but potentially active players by precedent being inducted into the Hall of Fame. There's usually some sort of cool-off period from your retirement in the vicinity of 5 years, based on most Hall of Fames. And it's important, too, to allow careers to be given time to breathe and see how their legacy unfolds in the wake of their retirement. You can get caught up in recency bias, get caught up in the emotions of a player or a coach's career when they're still active, and that can unfairly, positively or negatively influence decisions about post-playing career credentials and rewards. And like I said, no one's questioning Wayne's place in either, or in particular the Hall of Fame, but for mine as well as being an immortal. It's just that I don't like the precedent sets. There's going to be plenty of time to celebrate Wayne's induction into the Hall of Fame if they're retired. And arguably, it weakens the celebration of his induction, because he should be the head. When Wayne Bennett does retire, even if he's still, knowing Wayne, he dies while he's coaching, he's going to be coaching into his 90s.
I was about to say, could they be concerned that he's going to keep coaching till he leaves this mortal coil?
Yeah, well, obviously we joke about it, but it
Hugh
feels
Jackman
like that.
with the Wolverine role.
Yeah.
Yeah, until he's 90.
Disney's going
to...
Yeah.
Until you're 90.
Yeah. Where I'm a little bit upset is that also Wayne and his importance to rugby league, he should be the headline act of the year he is inducted into the Hall of Fame. And that's, not to say that we shouldn't be celebrating Jack Gibson right now as well, but it should be Jack Gibson's celebration now as the coach, and obviously all the administrators for their contributions. And when Wayne comes in, he is the headline act. He is one of the pillars of rugby league when he gets inducted. So I just feel like it's been handled a little bit clumsily, and as much for the precedent that it opens the door for down the path for future coaches and players to be inducted while still active, and stuff can change in a career. God forbid that there's, a player or a coach inducted while they're active, and then some really unsavory stuff comes out later that, would be a black mark on their induction into the Hall of Fame. And then on top of that, the fact that while he is actively, being inducted now, he can't be, as he should be, the headline act celebrating that particular class of inductees. So, yeah, that's my issues with the process. Otherwise, it's a fantastic class of inductees. I'm not really upset about that. And I'm certainly not upset about Wayne being in the Hall of Fame in the big picture. Like I said, he is an immortal as much as he is a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I haven't really got too much I can argue with you there about 40. The only thing that I might throw forward as an alternative if they're ever faced with a similar situation again, and I don't know whether they will, maybe someone like Craig Bellamy might end up in a similar scenario to Wayne Bennett, coaching until his very senior years, and he's probably not that far off it as it is, but whether it might have been perhaps a better time to issue it his membership in the Hall of Fame when he announces that it's his final year of coaching. Like when he says, look, this is it. This is definitely it. I'm retiring at the end of this year. And then it's almost like, a testimonial year for him. And because with players, a lot of players that get testimonial years, and it's not a very common thing, but it's when they've been a long time with one club. Now, Bennett's really got around to a lot of different clubs, and if he decides, for example, that his final year with South on his contract he's about to take up will be his final year of coaching, I don't know whether South would necessarily give him a testimonial year, but maybe that might have been a good time for the rugby league world to induct him into the Hall of Fame in what is his final year of coaching. But anyway, that's all. That's just my alternative suggestion there. Clint, anything you want to add to what John had to say about the Hall of Fame people?
I couldn't agree more with your take on an income or a current working NRL coach, and also because the methodology is applied to players. So often we hear even players that are recently retired, have to be retired for a certain period of time before you're even considered for qualification. I think in a coaching perspective, you should at least be inactive to be considered.
Yep. Okay, we move on. Big news across the ditch with Sean Johnson to retire. Look, I haven't actually been reading any of the media around that, but I'm assuming that injuries have really taken their toll this year, and it's certainly hasn't been a year that the Warriors have been doing too much in the way of celebrating. So it's not really come as any sort.
The Eels and he throws the towel in. Come on, man.
Timing is not a coincidence. We broke that man. No, I mean, he's turning 34 in September. He is not a spring chicken anymore. Being a fantastic servant to the game, one of the most iconic New Zealand players to come out in the modern era. Arguably their most iconic number 7 historically now. Had huge expectations. The burden of expectation was monstrous on him, given how electric he was as a young playmaker. Couldn't quite achieve that initially at the Warriors. Went to Cronulla, found some more stability in his playmaking repertoire, went back to New Zealand to spearhead a big push for them last year. I don't think he's had any issues off the field. Fantastic pin-up boy for the game, one of the most exciting players of his era. The only thing I'll say is that it's that balance, isn't it? You talk about that testimonial year for Wayne, and I know a lot of players would be embarrassed at the concept of a testimonial year. He's maybe just left it a fraction late for fans to come out and really celebrate his career. Thankfully, the Warriors already had sold out home games to round out the season. And ironically, he ends his career, or provisionally, assuming it doesn't backflip, will end his career playing with the against the other club that he played for in the Cronulla Sharks. So I'm sure they'll give him a fitting send-off in the penultimate the penultimate round of the competition. I believe they have a last round bye. But yeah, a bit of a surprise when it came out. But when you look at the numbers and how much tread is on the tyres and all the injuries, because he's had some significant leg injuries, it's not a surprise. So well done, Sean. I'm sure he's inspired a future generation of Kiwi players to get involved in rugby league, and he'll certainly go down as one of the funnest players to watch from this era.
Fellas, I'm going to power through with the next few pieces of NRL news, and then I'll throw back to you if there's any one of those that you wish to comment on. First of all, we've got Lachlan Croker, who's going to be returning for Manly after a long period out of the game this season with what started as concussion. I think there was a bit of a neck injury involved in as well, but he was really doing it tough. Thought he was coming back a number of times, felt ill, felt not right. He's finally making his return, so we wish him well with that. Justin Olam, who we talked about earlier with regard to that send-off, but I think he was looking at fighting the 4-week suspension, but he's now accepting it because he's out for the season with injury. So you won't see anything more of Justin Olam during 2024. Tavita Pangai Jr. looks like he's off to Catalans in the English Super League. There were 13 players, quite phenomenal, 13 players who were fined as a result of indiscretions in the last round of the Rugby League. Fines are certainly coming in as the preferred method of punishment for indiscretions in Rugby League, as evidenced by that. and also the North Sydney, New South Wales Cup coach has received a breach notice, which he is defending and insisting that he will defend, for being involved in placing bets on the outcome of rugby league matches, which anyone who is involved in the staff of any club cannot bet on any rugby league match involved with the NRL or lower grades. So, fellas, anything you want to jump on, Clint?
I said to you guys in the green room in relation to the betting situation. Ignorance is an excuse with that. All members of football club staff and administration staff at NRL clubs every year are given the lowdown on expectations, code of conduct. This is a clear breach of it if it is proven to have taken place. We obviously say that allegedly and with that caveat, but to even find yourself in the circumstance or the situation where these type of accusations can be lodged against you is not a good look, and it comes with it very dire consequences. So it should be a sorry tale if it does unfold the way it seems it's going to for anyone who has professional sporting aspirations, that you just don't get involved with this while you maintain, and betting, that is, while you hold a position in a rugby league club.
Yeah, absolutely right, and I believe, as I said, that that particular coach is fighting the charges. I guess the reminder for any person that's involved in rugby league about that is that it is obvious that there is the software available with betting organisations like Tabcorp to be able to pick up bets under the names of anyone that is involved in football. John, the last thing we're going to talk about tonight, and very briefly, but I'm going to throw it to you here, because you have Bulldog supporters in your family, so you're not anti-Dogs supporters in any way, but was an incident involving the Dogs supporters and a Raiders fan after the game, and it's you don't want to. I know that there are Bulldog supporters who are upset.
Yeah, you don't want to tar all the good supporters with the same brush to shame the degenerates and miscreants that are involved in this incident. But if you're being inflammatory, and maybe I am being a little bit provocative here, what we saw on the weekend is perhaps a reinforcement of maybe the game isn't better when Canterbury are going well. Because, geez, come on, guys, you've been good for all of 2 months, and you already started abusing opposition fans. Like, come on, pull your heads in.
Absolutely. I did see some comments on social media where some Dogs supporters were defending the actions and saying, look, it's just a bit of fun banter between supporters, and that the Canberra supporter was part of that. Clearly he wasn't.
No, he was not.
And I would also reinforce that if you've got a group of about 20 or 30 supporters around one supporter, that I'll guarantee you're not creating a welcoming or non-threatening situation, especially if you're trying to pants him, if you're trying to knock him off his feet, if you're trying to even lightly tap him with objects, if you're surrounding a bloke who's just on his way, apparently, allegedly, he's on his way to his car after the game, and even if you're just having in what is in your mind a bit of fun, you have to understand, if you've got 20 people surrounding you and having a go at you after a game of football, you're not going to take it as fun and banter.
No.
I guarantee you. Put yourself in that person's position. You are not going to regard it as fun and banter. It's not a good look for their club. and I believe that a representative of the Bulldogs did try to reach out to that Canberra fan that was involved in that. If it's the particular fan that I have had the opportunity to meet during the final series back in 2022, look, he's a fun bloke. He enjoys rugby league, and it's a shame to see that sort of incident result in tarring a group of supporters with the same brush. But you know what? I guess you have to say there's a bit of form in past years with this, and you don't want them to go down that same track.
No, like I said, that's the funny thing about percentiles is that 95% of the Bulldogs fan base could be amazing fans, but if 5%, shitbags, dickheads, assholes like we just saw here, there's a reason why there are sayings about one bad apple spoils a bunch and whatnot, because those impressions go a long way. And like I said, the Dogs have been good for the better part of 2 months, and suddenly they're talking a lot of shit. And that probably goes hand in hand with something that I've really been annoyed with. And it's not their fault. It's the whole media cycle that we see in rugby league, and the whole the deliberate tall poppy syndrome. And the Dogs are very much in the nurturing, fertilising prospect of the media, where they're building them up to be, so good and so exciting and premiership threats and how good are they. Not too dissimilar to what we saw with the Warriors last year. And, Cameron Serrato is back to being a super coach. This week, Stephen Crichton is the second best player in rugby league. Second best player in rugby league. Crichton is an awesome young player, but they're crowning him as the second best player after Nathan Cleary after 2 months of good football. And a year is a long time in rugby league. Last year, the Warriors were the hot shit. They were going to be, not a dynasty, but perennial top 8 contenders under Coach Andrew Webster, who was the best young coach in the game. And, look where they are this year. If it wasn't for Parramatta, that'd be the Vultures would be feasting on right now. There have been massive disappointments. Year-on-year effort and year-on-year consistency is so hard in the NRL. So let's not go crowning Serrato on the Bulldogs just yet. They might end up being great for a number of years now, but just the reaction from the media is like, yeah, the Bulldogs have arrived. How good of such great recruitment, such great coaching. They're going to be contenders every year now. It's like, no, let's not crown them just yet.
Yeah, and look, I just want to add my little bit before I throw to Clint for his final comments. When it comes to going to particular grounds as a supporter, you don't want to feel as if it's not a good thing to actually go there. We know that all teams have supporters that fit into that unsavoury category for whatever reason. And look, I'll come straight out and say I now refuse to go to Penrith Park to watch Eels and Panthers games because of incidents that have happened to me at that ground. I actually, and as you know, and we've talked about it before, John. For me, it's been an accumulation.
Yeah, it's not a singular incident. Exactly.
Over about a 6 or 7 year period. So I reached the point where I just made the decision I wouldn't go there. Now, because I don't have to go there to watch those games, and can I just point out that again, it's not tarring all the supporters with the same brush. In fact, in one of the incidents that happened to me at Penrith Park, I had Penrith supporters around me that were actually, telling me, don't, like, these blokes are idiots. Like, this is ridiculous that this is happening to you. So, but again, this ends up being the choice that people make. People and the NRL and the clubs need to be conscious of this, that if, as a supporter of a club, you feel that there are certain grounds that you don't feel, and it's not even a matter of not feeling safe. It's a matter of feeling like you can't go to that ground and enjoy yourself, and it's due to what you cop from other supporters. And we're not talking about banter, right? Because every team's got people that enjoy their banter, and if you can't cop a bit of banter in rugby league at the ground, well, that's a bit sad. But we're talking about outright abuse, having things thrown at you, being made to feel as if you've got to be on your guard. And so I come straight out. I've actually raised it with Parramatta as a club that, and others have too, that we don't feel as supporters that we can go to that particular ground. And that's a shame, because for me, that's a relatively quick trip to an away game. And I find going to Penrith quite a convenient away game. It's about a half-hour drive. Parking's normally pretty good. And if you get in the stands there, it's a good view. But no one wants to put up with the garbage that can go on, or I should rather say, I don't want to put up with the garbage that I've copped there, and I know I'm not alone. And if the Dogs don't nip this in the bud, and people don't want to go to Dogs games because they fear that they're going to not enjoy it, or if they're going to feel intimidated or what have you, then they need to be aware of it. Every single club, if you've got supporters that do that, it's not a badge of honour to make opposing supporters feel intimidated. We want opposing teams to feel intimidated because of what happens on the field and the noise that's made in the stands and that sort of stuff. You don't want to feel as if you don't feel entirely safe or comfortable in going to the game. So anyway, that's my final say on that. Clint, is there anything you want to say to wrap things up?
Yeah, look, it's a an interesting line that the Bulldogs have to tread here, and by the Bulldogs I mean the club, the organisation, as opposed to the team. You go back to the turn of the century and a very successful period for Canterbury in the early 2000s. I remember a number of games across that period. We're going between 20 to 24 years ago now. Whether it was home games or away games, that fan misconduct was certainly stories in the headlines around their matches. I remember a particular game that I was personally at in 2002 at Parramatta Stadium, where violence unfolded in the stairway in and around me as I was exiting the ground. I would have been 12 years old at the time, and thankfully I was with Dad. But you don't want to see things like that, and I'm not suggesting that's what's happened here, but things can escalate quickly, particularly if someone who's supposedly on the end of banter takes things the wrong way as well. So it's important that there is a united front and a strong stance taken against antisocial behaviour, because it's got the potential to escalate into violence, and that's the last thing we want anyone to experience. And I'm not being accusatorial saying that that's what happened in this particular instance, but it is something that has happened in Bulldogs fan bases of years gone by, particularly when they've been successful. So it's something that they've got to keep in mind, and make sure that the few don't ruin it for the many. Because as was originally said, I personally know a lot of Bulldogs fans who would never engage in such behaviour and know how to have a good time at the football. So I hope that it's something that is nipped in the bud quickly.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about rugby league is, unlike some other professional sports in certain parts of the world, and particularly in other codes, you can be sitting alongside fans of opposing clubs and be enjoying the game. I mean, we see it ourselves in, families will have people who support different clubs.
Yeah,
and
half
yeah, you'll see mates that support different clubs who are together at the football. You're not going to see that so much in soccer games for clubs around the world, and their ultra supporters and those sorts of scenarios. It's probably a little bit more than tribal, the level of support that's there. It's I think unfortunately there's almost a gang mentality with that. So we don't have that in rugby league. I hope it never comes in rugby league, because we enjoy being able to sit near people of different supporter groups and listening to takes and having a bit of banter and all that sort of stuff. So let's hope it never changes. Anyway, fellas, that just about wraps things up on what's been another marathon news episode of the podcast, the Tip Sheet podcast. John and Clint, fine job done, fellas. Well done there. Another reminder about the appearance of the Cumberland Throw in the home of the Eels, Parramatta Leagues Club, the Bistro, from 5:30 p.m. Michael Buetten is our guest on Friday before the big game. So if you're heading down to watch the match between the Eels and the Panthers, get into the Leagues Club, get into the Bistro, enjoy a feed, enjoy a drink, listen to some footy talk, come and meet Michael Buetten, grab a photo, get something signed, have a bit of a chat with him, all before you head over for the main game between the Eels and the Panthers. Hopefully the Eels get across the line there, but it's going to be a big ask this week. Also, thanks to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Again, we couldn't do what we do without them as our sponsors. They've been around for such a long time, virtually since the inception of the Cumberland Throw. And of course, if you are listening to this via the YouTube platform, be sure to like and subscribe. Do that whatever platform that you're watching it on. Give it a like, but especially YouTube. Give it a like, give it a subscribe. That all helps with our channel, allows us to grow into the future. Fellas, we're at that end of the program. So as I always say, go you mighty Eels.